Chapter 18. The History House. A posse of touchable policemen crossed the Meenakil River, sluggish and swollen with recent rain, and picked their way through the wet undergrowth, the clink of handcuff in someone's heavy pocket. Their wide khaki shorts were rigid with starch and bobbed over the tall grass like a row of stiff skirts, quite independent of the limbs that moved inside them. There were 6 of them. Servants of the state. Politeness. Obedience. Loyalty. Intelligence. Courtesy. Efficiency. The Kottayam Police. A cartoon platoon. New Age princes in funny pointed helmets. Cardboard lined with cotton. Hair oil stained. Their shabby khaki crowns. Dark of heart. Deadly purposed. They lifted their thin legs high, clumping through tall grass. Ground creepers snagged in their dew-damp leg hair. Burrs and grass flowers enhanced their dull socks. Brown millipedes slept in the soles of their steel-tipped, touchable boots. Rough grass left there. Leg skin raw, crisscrossed with cuts. Wet mud fatted under their feet as they squelched. Through the swamp. They trudged past darter birds on the tops of trees, drawing their sodden wings spread out like laundry against the sky. Past egrets. Cormorants. Adjutant storks. Sarah's cranes looking for space to dance. Purple herons with pitiless eyes. Deafening, their rarark rarark rarark. Mother birds and their eggs. The early morning heat was full of the promise of worse to come. Beyond the swamp that smelled of still water, they walked past ancient trees cloaked in vines. Gigantic money plants. Wild pepper. Cascading purple acuminus. Past a deep blue beetle balanced on an unbending blade of grass. Past giant spider webs that had withstood the rain and spread like whispered gossip from tree to tree. A banana flower sheathed in claret bracts hung from a scruffy, torn-leafed tree. A gem held out by a grubby schoolboy. A jewel in the velvet jungle. Crimson dragonflies mated in the air. Double-deckered. Deft. One admiring policeman. Watched and wondered briefly about the dynamics of dragonfly sex and what went into what. Then his mind clicked to attention and police thoughts returned. Onwards. Past tall anthills congealed in the rain. Slumped like drugged sentries asleep at the gates of paradise. Past butterflies drifting through the air like happy messages. Huge ferns. A chameleon. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy 143. A startling shoe flower. The scurry of grey jungle fowl running for cover. The nutmeg tree that Velia Poppin hadn't found. A forked canal. Still. Choked with duckweed. Like a dead green snake. A tree trunk fallen over it. The touchable policeman minced across. Twirling polished bamboo batons. Hairy fairies with lethal wands. Then the sunlight was fractured by thin trunks of tilting trees. Dark of heart ness and tiptoed 4FL to the heart of darkness. The sound of stridulating crickets swelled. Gray squirrels streaked down mottled trunks of rubber trees that slanted towards the sun. Old scars slashed across their bark. Sealed. Healed. Untapped. Acres of this, and then, a grassy clearing. A house. The History House. Whose doors were locked and windows open. With cold stone floors and billowing, ship-shaped shadows on the walls. Where waxy ancestors with tough toenails and breath that smelled of yellow maps whispered papery whispers. Where translucent lizards lived behind old paintings. Where dreams were captured and redreamed. Where an old Englishman ghost, sickled to a tree, was abrogated by a pair of two-egg twins, a mobile republic with a puff who had planted a Marxist flag in the earth beside him. As the platoon of policemen minced past, they didn't hear him beg. In his kind missionary voice. Excuse me, would you wouldn't happen to I don't suppose you'd have a cigar on you? No? No, I didn't think so. The History House. Where, in the years that followed, the terror, still to come, would be buried in a shallow grave. Hidden under the happy humming of hotel cooks. The humbling of old communists. The slow death of dancers. The toy histories that rich tourists came to play with. It was a beautiful house. White-walled once. Red-roofed. But painted in weather colors now. With brushes dipped in nature's palette. Moss green. Earth brown. Crumble black. Making it look older than it really was. Like sunken treasure dredged up from the ocean bed. Whale-kissed and barnacled. Swaddled in silence. Breathing bubbles through its broken windows. Deep veranda ran all around. The rooms themselves were recessed, buried in shadow. The tiled roof swept down like the sides of an immense, upside-down boat. Rotting beams supported on once white pillars had buckled at the center, leaving a yawning, gaping hole. A history hole. A history-shaped hole in the universe through which, at twilight, dense clouds of silent bats billowed like factory smoke and drifted into the night. They returned at dawn with news of the world. A gray haze in the rosy distance that suddenly coalesced and blackened over the house before it plummeted through the history hole like smoke in a film running backwards. All day they slept, the bats, lining the roof like fur, spattering the floors with shit. The policemen stopped and fanned out. They didn't really need to, but they liked these touchable games. They positioned themselves strategically, crouching by the broken, low stone boundary wall. Quick piss. Hot foam on warm stone. Police piss. Drowned ants in yellow bubbly. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy 144. Deep breaths. Then together, on their knees and elbows, they crept towards the house. Like film policemen. Softly, softly through the grass. Batons in their hands. Machine guns in their minds. Responsibility for the touchable future on their thin, but able shoulders. They found their quarry in the back veranda. A spoiled puff. A fountain in a love in Tokyo. And in another corner, as lonely as a wolf, a carpenter with blood-red nails. Asleep. Making nonsense of all that touchable cunning. The surprise swoop. The headlines in their heads. Desperado caught in police dragnet. For this insolence, this spoiling the fun, their quarry paid. Oh yes. They woke Velutha with their boots. Tappan and Rahel woke to the shout of sleep surprised by shattered kneecaps. Screams died in them and floated belly up, like dead fish. Cowering on the floor, rocking between dread and disbelief, they realized that the man being beaten was Velutha. Where had he come from? What had he done? Why had the policeman brought him here? They heard the thud of wood on flesh. Boot on bone. On teeth. The muffled grunt when a stomach is kicked in. The muted crunch of skull on cement. The gurgle of blood on a man's breath when his lung is torn by the jagged end of a broken rib. Blue-lipped and dinner-plate-eyed, they watched, mesmerized by something that they sensed but didn't understand, the absence of caprice in what the policeman did. The abyss where anger should have been. The sober, steady brutality, the economy of it all. They were opening a bottle. Or shutting a tap. Cracking an egg to make an omelet. The twins were too young to know that these were only history's henchmen. Sent to square the books and collect the dues from those who broke its laws. Impelled by feelings that were primal yet paradoxically wholly impersonal. Feelings of contempt born of inchoate, unacknowledged fear, civilization's fear of nature, men's fear of women, power's fear of powerlessness. Man's subliminal urge to destroy what he could neither subdue nor deify. Men's needs. What Tappan and Rahel witnessed that morning, though they didn't know it then, was a clinical demonstration in controlled conditions. This was not war after all, or genocide, of human nature's pursuit of ascendancy. Structure. Order. Complete monopoly. It was human history, masquerading as God's purpose, revealing herself to an underage audience. There was nothing accidental about what happened that morning. Nothing incidental. It was no stray mugging or personal settling of scores. This was an era imprinting itself on those who lived in it. History in live performance. If they hurt Velutha more than they intended to, it was only because any kinship, any connection between themselves and him, any implication that if nothing else, at least biologically he was a fellow creature, had been severed long ago. They were not arresting a man, they were exorcising fear. They had no instrument to calibrate how much punishment he could take. No means of gauging how much or how permanently they had damaged him. Unlike the custom of rampaging religious mobs or conquering armies running riot, that morning in the heart of darkness the posse of touchable policemen acted with The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy 145. Economy, not frenzy. Efficiency, not anarchy. Responsibility, not hysteria. They didn't tear out his hair or burn him alive. They didn't hack off his genitals and stuff them in his mouth. They didn't rape him. Or behead him. After all, they were not battling an epidemic. They were merely inoculating a community against an outbreak. In the back veranda of the History House, as the man they loved was smashed and broken, Mrs. Eapen and Mrs. Rajagopalan, twin ambassadors of God knows what, learned 2 new lessons. Lesson number 1, blood barely shows on a black man, dum-dum, and lesson number 2, it smells though. Sickly sweet. Like old roses on a breeze. Dum-dum. Medio, one of history's agents asked. Maddie Ericum, another replied. Enough? Enough. They stepped away from him. Craftsmen assessing their work. Seeking aesthetic distance. Their work abandoned by God and history, by Marx, by man, by woman, and, in the hours to come, by children, lay folded on the floor. He was semi-conscious, but wasn't moving. His skull was fractured in 3 places. His nose and both his cheekbones were smashed, leaving his face pulpy, undefined. The blow to his mouth had split open his upper lip and broken 6 teeth, 3 of which were embedded in his lower lip, hideously inverting his beautiful smile. 4 of his ribs were splintered, 1 had pierced his left lung, which was what made him bleed from his mouth. The blood on his breath bright red. Fresh. Frothy. His lower intestine was ruptured and hemorrhaged, the blood collected in his abdominal cavity. His spine was damaged in 2 places, the concussion had paralyzed his right arm, and resulted in a loss of control over his bladder and rectum. Both his kneecaps were shattered. Still they brought out the handcuffs. Cold. With the sour metal smell. Like steel bus rails and the bus conductor's hands from holding them. That was when they noticed his painted nails. One of them held them up and waved the fingers coquettishly at the others. They laughed. What's this in a high falsetto? AC/DC? One of them flicked at his penis with his stick. Come on, show us your special secret. Show us how big it gets when you blow it up. Then he lifted his boot, with millipedes curled into its sole, and brought it down with a soft thud. They locked his arms across his back. Click. And click. Below a lucky leaf. An autumn leaf at night. That made the monsoons come on time. He had goosebumps where the handcuffs touched his skin. It isn't him, Rahel whispered to Estha. I can tell. It's his twin brother. Urumban. From Kochi. Unwilling to seek refuge in fiction, Estha said nothing. Someone was speaking to them. A kind touchable policeman. Kind to his kind. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy 146. Mole, are you all right? Did he hurt you? And not together, but almost, the twins replied in a whisper. Yes. No. Don't worry. You're safe with us now. Then the policeman looked around and saw the grass mat. The pots and pans. The inflatable goose. The Qantas koala with loosened button eyes. The ballpoint pens with London streets in them. Socks with separate colored toes. Yellow-rimmed red plastic sunglasses. A watch with the time painted on it. Whose are these? Where did they come from? Who brought them? An edge of worry in the voice. Estha and Rahel, full of fish, stared back at him. The policemen looked at one another. They knew what they had to do. The Qantas koala they took for their children. And the pens and socks. Police children with multicolored toes. They burst the goose with a cigarette. Bang. And buried the rubber scraps. Useless goose. Too recognizable. The glasses one of them wore. The others laughed, so he kept them on for a while. The watch they all forgot. It stayed behind in the history house. In the back veranda. A faulty record of the time. 10 to 2. They left. 6 princes, their pockets stuffed with toys. A pair of 2-egg twins. And the god of loss. He couldn't walk. So they dragged him. Nobody saw them. Bats, of course, are blind. Chapter 19.